As we celebrate our 20th year of broadcasting, we want to share the very special ministry of Dr. James Merritt by offering this collection of what we consider to be the best of the best. 20 of the most popular messages preached on our broadcast in one collection. This special collection is available now from Touching Lives. Get all 20 messages on 10 CDs for only $20. Call 1-800-413-1131 or go to touchinglives.org. Today on Touching Lives.
Because Jesus is the Good Shepherd, there's one thing we can always know. No problem that is before me is bigger than the Lord that's above me. No problem that's before me is bigger than the Lord that's above me, because Jesus is the Good Shepherd who not only gave His life for the sheep, He came back from the dead to prove one thing. Hey, look, if I can conquer death, everything else is a snap.
Celebrating 20 years of sharing hope and encouragement for life, this is Touching Lives with James Merritt.
I want my life to be worth living. And when I get to the end of my life, I want to be able to look back at my life and say, James, that was a life well lived. Because one of the things that I hear so often, I hear it more and more from people, is something like this. People say, you know, I'm just trying to find myself. Some of you are married to a person. And the reason why you're having marital difficulties is because that spouse, that husband, that wife, they've never found themselves. Or you have a son or a daughter. They've never found themselves, and they're looking, they're trying. Or maybe you're one of those people here this morning and you say, man, that's my struggle. I've never really found myself. That's what I'm trying to do. Well, then you came to the right service. We're in the Gospel of John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I want you to turn to John chapter 10. And the way that Jesus is going to describe Himself to me, of all the statements that He makes, this one to me may be the most encouraging, it may be the most inspiring, the most strengthening, the most comforting statement that He makes, maybe in His entire ministry. He says 5 words, John chapter 10, verse 11. He says, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. Now, there's one thing that every shepherd has to have to be a shepherd. What is that? You've got to have sheep, right? If you're a shepherd, you've got to have sheep. Well, we already know who the shepherd is. He says, I am the good shepherd. So just take a wild guess. Then who do you think the sheep are? Yeah, we are, right? We are the sheep. And you'll never understand yourself fully. You'll never find yourself completely until you begin to see yourself the way you really are. If God were to turn every one of us into an animal today, we'd all be sheep. Matter of fact, I didn't know this. Sheep are mentioned in the Bible over 300 times. They're mentioned more than any other animal in the Bible, because when God looks at us, when God looks at you and God looks at me, He looks at us through the eyes of a shepherd. And when He sees us, He doesn't just see names, or He doesn't just see faces. He doesn't just see personalities. He sees sheep. If I were to ask you the question of the 150 Psalms that were written in the Bible, what's the greatest psalm? We'd all vote unanimously, the 23rd Psalm. And it's interesting that that David begins writing the 23rd Psalm as a sheep writing to a shepherd. He says, you know this verse, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And what he was really saying was, you may think I'm a king, but I know how God sees me. God doesn't see me as a king. God sees me as a sheep. There is one way that we are different from sheep. Sheep are too dumb even to worry that they can't take care of themselves. Now we worry, right? We worry, especially when we confront situations we can't take care of. When we're put into a circumstance that we know we can't handle, we worry. I may have told you this before, but I'm going to be very transparent. If you said to me, what is the biggest thing you struggle with in your spiritual life? It's worry. My mom's 92 years old. She is a chronic worrier. I got it from my mom. I got it honestly. And I'm just telling you. I was talking to Mom today. She said, what are you going to be talking about? I was told her what kind of the message. And she said, yep, you're just like me. I'm a worrier. And most of us are in the same boat. You know, most of us in this room have worries, and most of us in this room do worry. As a matter of fact, to be honest with you, let me tell you the person that really irritates me. I can get along with just about anybody. I'm a people person, love people. I get along with just about anybody. I'll tell you the person that really irritates me, I can't stand. I cannot stand the person that says something like this. I just don't worry. I just don't let things bother me. I just, I kind of roll with the flow. I'm just, take the punches as they come. I just don't let anything bother me. That person worries me. They really worry me. And you know this, right? The one thing that will suck joy and contentment and peace out of your life quicker than anything is worry and fear and anxiety and concern. And here's what's so bad about worry. There's really only one of two things you can do with your worries. There's only one of two things you can do. You can either handle them yourself or let somebody else handle them for you. It's only two things you can do. You handle them yourselves or you let somebody handle them for you. One of my favorite stories, I may have told this before, but I love the story about this guy that was a big worrier. Matter of fact, he worried so much, he developed all kinds of physical problems. He developed high blood pressure. He started losing his hair. He couldn't sleep at night. He developed these nervous tics. It was affecting his job, his marriage, his personal relationships. He was always irritable. People didn't like to be around him because he got just worried about everything. Well, one day, he walks out of his house, going to work, and his neighbor happened to see him come out of the house, and he couldn't believe it. The guy comes out of the house, he's whistling, he's singing, he's smiling, he's totally at peace, he's just praising God, just having the time of his life. So the neighbor runs over there, and he says, Bob, he says, I can't believe the change has taken place. He said, what in the world's happened to you? I've never seen you like this. I've never seen you so happy and so full of joy and so full of peace. And Bob says, oh man, he says, it's just wonderful. He said, you don't seem to be worried about anything. He says, I am not. I don't have a worry in the world. He said, what happened? How did you do that? He said, I've hired a professional worrier. He said, he does all of my worrying for me. The guy says, are you kidding? He says, no. He says, unbelievable. He says, I just give him all my worries. He said, where did you find him? He said, he had a want ad in the paper, so I hired him. He said, what does he charge? He says, he charges $1,000 a day. The neighbor said, $1,000 a day? He said, man, you don't have that kind of money. You can't afford him. How are you going to pay him? He said, that's his worry. Now, we all have worries, right? We all have worries we can't handle. You're worried about your marriage. It's going on the rocks, and you just don't seem like you're able to stop it. You're worried about that teenager, and you see that teenager going down that wrong path, but that teenager's not listening to you. You're worried about an illness that may not get better. And you're worried that you may never find a job that paid you what your old job used to pay you. Well, I believe the good life is a life where you can face your deepest fears and you can face your darkest places and you can find your greatest worries not with fear, but with faith. And when you understand two simple things, you are a helpless sheep, but you have a good shepherd that will take care of you if you'll let him. Then you'll learn this lesson. So I want you to take out the door today. Sheep need not fear when the shepherd is near. Sheep need not fear when the shepherd is near. Now I want to ask you a question. Why did Jesus call himself, of all the things he could have compared himself to, why did Jesus call himself a shepherd? And more than that, why did he add that little adjective, I am? Now, that's not an ordinary run-of-the-mill dime a dozen minimum wage shepherd. I am the good shepherd. Why did Jesus say that? Because what a good shepherd does for sheep is exactly what Jesus does for us. Three things you can write down this morning. Number one, when I'm in the dark, God will guide me where I need to go. When I'm in the dark, God will guide me where I need to go. Now, one of the things that fascinates me about Jesus is how he looked at people, because I've already said he doesn't look at people the way we look at people. You know, when we look at people, we see nameless faces, bland personalities, hang-ups, hiccups. But when Jesus saw people, he saw them as sheep. And he didn't just see them as sheep. He saw them as sheep that were wandering around in the dark, not knowing exactly where they need to go. When you drive back home today, when you drive back into your neighborhood, when you get in the middle of that disaster called Atlanta traffic going to work tomorrow, when the next time you go to a packed-out movie house or you go to a sold-out sporting event, I want you to think about this verse of Scripture, Matthew 9, verse 36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Do you know why a flock of sheep that doesn't have a shepherd is so sad? Because sheep have no sense of direction. And without leadership, they'll just wander aimlessly. They'll stray away from the flock. They'll lose their way. They'll walk right over a cliff without a second thought. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had people walk into my office as a pastor, messed up their lives, destroyed their marriages, lost their jobs, headed for a prison sentence, blew up every meaningful relationship they have, and they'll walk into my office and they'll say something like this, I don't know what happened, I just got off the wrong road. I don't know what happened. I just kind of drifted away. I don't know what happened. I just kind of wandered away from what I knew was right. And the reason why so many messed up people live so many messed up lives is because they don't know what they are, they don't know where they are, and they don't know how to get to where they need to go. So you know what you do? It's common to all of us. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, and you don't even know how to get to where you need to go, there's only one thing left to do. You wander. If you ever get lost in the woods, you know what people do that get lost when they wander. They just wind up going in circles. That's all they know to do. So spouses wander away from marriages for somebody else. And kids will wander away from their parents and get with the wrong crowd. And people will just wander into a life of drugs and alcohol and materialism. Because just like sheep, we need guidance, we need direction, we need leadership. By the way, do you know the difference between a cowboy and a shepherd? A cowboy drives cattle. A shepherd leads sheep. Big difference. That's why Jesus said what he said in verse 10. He said, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Now, the thief is Satan. And if you ever wonder if you're headed in the right direction with your life or with the decisions that you're making in your life right now, I just want you to remember something very simple. The shepherd will guide you to the right places. Satan will drive you to the wrong places. When you fall into temptation, you're not just led into temptation, you're driven into temptation. If you're here this morning and you've kind of done that, we've all done it, you've kind of stepped into it. You did something, you knew it was wrong when you did it, you knew you shouldn't do it, but you did it anyway. If you look back on it, there was something that almost like an unseen passion that overtook you, and you weren't just led into doing it, you were driven into doing it. And I was reading the other day, true story, there were a group of tourists in the Holy Land, and they passed by this flock that was going into town, and it was kind of interesting. The guy was not in front of them, the guy was in back of them. And so they were taking pictures, and one of the tourists went up to the guide, and he said, hey, I thought you said the shepherd led the sheep from the front. Why is he in the back? And the guide said, that's not the shepherd, that's the butcher. Now, that's exactly the position that Satan and sin will always take in your life, driving you, shoving you from the rear, reminding you of your past, giving you guilt, anxiety about the future, filling you with fear, uncertainty in the present, killing you with worry. And if you let him, that thief will come in, he'll steal your joy, he'll rob you of a happy marriage, he'll take away a good relationship with your children. But Jesus said, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll make you lie down in green pastures. That's what I'll do. I'll lead you beside still waters. That's what I'll do, because when you're in dark places, God will guide you where you need to go. Here's the second thing. When I'm in difficulty, God will get me where I need to be. When I'm in difficulty, God will get me where I need to be. Now look what Jesus says in verse 11. I'm the good shepherd. Then he says this, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, when Jesus says something once, everybody I think would agree. You better listen. If he says something one time, that's all I need to say it one time, I'll get it. When he says something 4 times, he's really saying, you better listen to what I'm telling you. And 4 times in this passage, he says, I lay down my life for the sheep. Says it 4 times. Because that's what separates an ordinary hireling from a good shepherd. The good shepherd says, I love my flock so much, I will go anywhere, I will do anything, I will pay any price, even if it means my own life, to make sure that I get you where you need to be. Because let me remind you of something else about sheep. Sheep are not only dumb animals, they are totally defenseless animals. I mean, almost every other animal on earth can defend itself in some way, right? Dogs can bite. Cats can scratch. Skunks can spray. What can a sheep do? Can't do anything. They need protection. And I got news for some of you in this room that walk out of here every week kind of full of pride. You say, hey, look, I got a good job. I got this. I got that. I don't need God. I don't need anybody else. I'm kind of good with my own life. Let me tell you something. You are absolutely, totally defenseless against the difficulties of life. I don't care how much money you've got in your bank account, I don't care what kind of a car you drive, what kind of a house you live in, what good health you're in. When it comes to the real difficulties of life, every day you walk out of your house, you are totally defenseless. And I got news for every one of you in this room. That's exactly where you are every day. You are totally helpless. Because regardless of your position or your possessions, every day you walk out the door of your house, there's that unexpected tornado. Let me tell you something. There's just no defense against a drunk driver. I wish there was. There's just no defense. There's just no defense against that person that will run that red light. There's some things you just absolutely cannot protect yourself. That deserting spouse, you fight for the marriage, you do everything you can, the spouse walks out. And what Jesus is saying is, just like sheep, you need a shepherd that can get you where you need to be. And now keep something else in mind about shepherds and sheep. This is something we don't understand, we don't like. Shepherds do not keep sheep from difficulty because they can't. What shepherds do is they guard sheep in difficulty. The shepherd can't say to the wolves and the bears, now y'all don't come anywhere around because we're going to be out feeding today. There are wolves and there are bears. They want to devour the sheep. There's bad weather. There's ticks. There's fleas. There's insects. They want to sicken the sheep and weaken the sheep. And the shepherd does not keep the sheep from difficulty. He guards the sheep in difficulty. He can't keep the sheep from coming in contact with bears or wolves, or else they couldn't even live. But he says, I'll tell you what, when you do, I will protect you. That's why he calls himself the good shepherd. That word good is a powerful word in the Greek language. It doesn't mean nice or sweet or effective. It literally means one of a kind in a class all by itself. Because here's what a good shepherd always does for the sheep. This is why, this will be worth coming to church for today. Do you know what a good shepherd always does for the sheep 100% of the time? He always does what's best for the sheep. Not 99% of the time, not 99.9% of the time, 100% of the time, the good shepherd will always do what's best for the sheep. And oh, by the way, yep, that includes going through difficulty and heartache and trouble and tragedy. But because Jesus is the good shepherd, there's one thing we can always know. No problem that is before me is bigger than the Lord that's above me. No problem that's before me is bigger than the Lord that's above me, because Jesus is the good shepherd who not only gave his life for the sheep, he came back from the dead to prove one thing. Hey, look, if I can conquer death, everything else is a snap. Boy, I'm worried about my job. Jesus came back from the dead. Don't sweat it. I'm worried about my cancer. Jesus came back from the dead. Don't sweat it. I'm worried about my finances. I'm worried about my 401k. Jesus came back from the dead. Don't sweat it. When I'm in darkness, God will guide me. When I'm in difficulty, God will get me where I need to be. Here's the last thing. When I'm in desperation, God will give me what I need to have. Watch this. He tells us one other thing about himself in verse 14. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, if you may not know this, no pun intended, let me just tell you, in the Bible, the word know doesn't mean what we think it means. When we say we know someone, that it means I know their name, I recognize them, I know, I recognize their face, I get who they are. That is not what the word know means in Scripture. The word know refers to a deep, intimate soul-to-soul knowledge. That's why the Bible refers many times to sexual intercourse as a man knowing his wife, because it's the deepest intimacy of all. And see, here's the amazing thing about shepherds. Shepherds don't just know their flock as a flock. They know their sheep individually. I don't know if you know this or not. Shepherds give every sheep a name. Every sheep has their own individual name, and a good shepherd has the ability to call one sheep out of an entire flock. But the good shepherd knows something else about his sheep. He not only knows the name of the sheep, he knows the nature of the sheep. He knows the ones that are kind of careless and just kind of will wander off. He knows the ones that are stubborn and will try to kind of go their own way. And he looks at all those sheep and he says, I know what you need individually. I know what you need individually. I know the how, the when, the where. I know how to meet those needs, because I want to go back to one thing I said a moment ago. Even though they're defenseless and even though they're dumb, there's one thing about sheep I really, really admire. You never see sheep worry. You'll never see a worried, anxious sheep. Sheep don't take blood pressure medicine. You'll never see a sheep losing wool over worry. You'll never see a sheep nervously rubbing its hoofs together. You'll never see a sheep sweat. You never see a sheep pacing back and forth. Sheep don't worry. You know why? Because they're born with this natural instinct of knowing, if I've got the shepherd, if I've got the presence of the shepherd and the provision of the shepherd and the protection of the shepherd, he can handle anything. I don't have to worry about it. So here's what I want to ask you to do. Take the biggest worry you've got in your life right now. I know you probably got more than one. You know, we all do. Let's take the biggest one. If I were to come to you and I would say, what is the absolute biggest worry? What is the biggest concern you've got in your life right now? And I were to ask you to write that down on a sheet of paper. Here's what I'd want you to remember. The concern of the sheep is never greater than the care of the shepherd. The concern of the sheep is never greater than the care of the shepherd. See, there's two things that make a good shepherd a good shepherd. He'll always lead the sheep where they need to go, and he'll always feed the sheep what they need to have. And that's why I believe the good life is a life that follows Jesus. Because think about this. Tell me how much better it gets than this. How much better does it get than when you walk out the door of your house and you know, if I get into a dark place, I've got a shepherd that will guide me where I need to go. If I get into a difficult place, I've got a shepherd that will get me where I need to be. If I get into a desperate place, I've got a shepherd that will give me what I need to have. I was watching the other day a commercial. It may have been a Mercedes or BMW. I don't remember. I know it was a car I couldn't afford. That's what I remember. But I remember looking at this commercial. And it's amazing. They were talking about the technology. You know, they've got cars today. They're making cars today that if you get too close to another car, you know, it'll let you know. They got cars today. If you go to fall asleep, you know, I wish we had chairs like that in the church. You know, if you go to fall asleep, they'll wake you up, right? And I mean, you know, I was watching this commercial, and I got to thinking to myself, what kind of a price do you think you could get for a car if you could be guaranteed, no matter what kind of an accident you were in, you survive? How much do you think that car would be worth? How much do you think a plane would be worth if you could guarantee, even if this plane crashes, everybody will walk out? How much money do you think it would cost to pay for a ship that no matter what happened, it was guaranteed never to sink under any circumstance? You say, wow, Pastor, you couldn't even put a price on that. Well, let me ask you this. What kind of a price can you put on following a shepherd who will not only guard you and guide you in this life, but when this life is over, take you all the way to spend an eternity with God? What kind of a price can you put on that? You know, in Bible days, I was reading that when a shepherd had to take a flock of sheep a long distance, they were considered a good shepherd. This is amazing. They were considered a good shepherd if they were able to get 50% of their flock from point A to point B. In other words, if a shepherd only had a 50% attrition rate, if he only lost 1 out of 2 sheep to bears and wolves and ticks and fleas and disease and sickness or whatever, he was considered a good shepherd. And yet Jesus comes along and says, oh, that's not a good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. You know why? Because when he starts out with 100 sheep, he ends up with 100 sheep. Jesus hasn't lost a sheep yet. Not one. I mean, not one. Now, I realize there's some of you here today, and just being honest with you, you're like a couple of guys that came out to see me after the 9:30 service. Jesus is not your good shepherd because you're not a part of his flock. And you may be sitting there and you may be saying, you know, that's all good news for everybody here, but it doesn't help me out because he's not my shepherd. I've never joined his flock. Well, guess what? Jesus was talking to you, primarily to you. You say, how do you know that? Look what he says in verse 16. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, and there will be one shepherd. So you're sitting out there this morning, and you're saying, man, that's me. I'm just like that sheep. I'm aimless. I'm helpless. Here's the good news. You want to walk out the door of these 4 walls, get back in your car, and be totally on your own? You're just a sheep out there. And just maybe hope by the look of the draw, maybe I won't drive off the cliff, maybe I won't walk into the stream, maybe a bear or a wolf won't attack me. I'll just try to kind of handle it on my own. You can do that if you want to, but here's the good news. You don't have to live life that way. You can come to the Good Shepherd today. You can become a part of his flock today. You can start living what I call the good life today. Because let me tell you what's real hard. Here's what's hard. If you're here this morning and you've already entrusted your life to the Good Shepherd and you're part of his flock and you're one of his fold and he's guiding you and guarding you and he's giving you what you need, it's real easy for us to say, oh man, Jesus is my Good Shepherd and I don't mind letting anybody know he's my Good Shepherd. That's not what's hard. Here's what's hard. What's hard is to admit you're a sheep and you need a shepherd. What's hard is to admit with all of your money and all of your position, and all of your possessions, and all of your power, and all of your personality, and all of your influence, when it comes to life, you are hopeless and you are helpless if you don't have a good shepherd guiding you and guarding you and giving you exactly what you need. So here's what I want to close with. So you're one of those out there today, and you'd be honest enough to say, you know, I've never given my life to Christ. I've never trusted Jesus. I've never become a part of the flock. He's not my good shepherd. Here's what I want to leave you with. If a sheep refuses to follow a shepherd, no matter why, if a sheep says, I'm not following that shepherd, I'm going to go my own way, I'm going to make my own way, mark it down. That sheep will either get lost, it will get hurt, or it will get killed. And Jesus comes along and says, I'm the good shepherd. I'll lead you where you need to go if you'll follow me. I'll give you what you need to have if you'll follow me. I'll get you anything that's important for your life if you'll follow me. And if you're ready to accept Jesus as your shepherd, He's ready to accept you as His sheep.
Worry is one of the most debilitating weapons that Satan uses against us. The moment we take our eyes off of Jesus and begin to focus on the pressures of life, we lose the strength that comes from our Good Shepherd. Don't let worry get the best of you. If you need encouragement today, call Touching Lives at 800-413-1131. Most of us would say we are much smarter than the average sheep. After all, they aren't very smart, are they? But left to our own judgment, we end up wandering through life, never experiencing the good life the way God intended. He has great plans for His children, and He provided us with the Good Shepherd to lead us through everything that we will ever face. Learn how to hear His voice with the message, The Good Life. Order your copy today. CDs $7, DVDs $12 at touchinglives.org or call 800-413-1131. Most people who have never encountered Jesus think that they are doing a good job of managing their own lives. But the truth is, they're a lost sheep wandering aimlessly through life with no true hope or direction. They need to know the Good Shepherd. Because of your faithful prayers and financial support, Touching Lives continues to shine the light of Jesus around the world.